about me, it doesn't get any better than that. I started my career as an actor at the University of Manitoba. I was Troilus and Cressida, Cassius and Julius Caesar, and hopeless in the classroom. I came to the attention of John Hirsch, who was founding the Manitoba Theatre Centre, and I was one of the founding members at age 18. And what a thrill. He remained for his entire life my mentor, my idol, and my friend. I had a brilliant idea. I would drop out of law school. I would go to join my Catholic actress girlfriend in Toronto, and I would become a huge television star. Well, one can only imagine my Jewish parents' surprised delight at that. Now, why didn't we think of that? A year later, I was back in Winnipeg. I applied at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation for a job as a production assistant, but there were no openings. But 4 producer-directors had quit that year, and so they made me a producer-director. I was paid the princely sum of $4,200 a year, for which I did Metro News, evening and morning sign-on and sign-off devotional services, and a country and western variety show called Red River Jamboree, which was fully sponsored by Kraft Food, always in the top 10, and my career has been going in the dumper ever since. The quest of the regional producers was to get to Toronto, but for me it was a problem, because the 4th best variety producer in Toronto went by the name of Norman Jewison. So I went to my supervising producer and said, Jack, I gotta get into children's programs. He said, are you nuts? You've got the top rated show in the country, for God's sakes. I said, I know the children. My heart is with the children. A year later, armed with copies of Men and Machines and Simply Spelling, I headed to Toronto and got a job as a producer-director in the children's department and ended up running the children's department. I switched to documentary and then I switched countries. I was a tough sell when I got to the United States because my work in Canada counted for nothing. I met with an agent from the International Creative Management Company, Sandy Wernick. He asked me what I did. I said I did documentaries. He was very encouraging. He said, you won't make a dime. Stanley Jacobson was producing the Johnny Cash show in Nashville, and he was a colleague from Toronto. And they were looking for someone to put visuals behind Johnny's songs. Coal miners, lumberjacks, prisoners, and prisoners. And I had both a variety and a documentary background, so they gave me the job. Now I needed an agent, and Sandy Wernick had written me a nice little note saying how much he enjoyed meeting me, so I hired Sandy to negotiate my deal. This year marks our 50th anniversary. Right. I'm a little ticked off at him because he seems to be favoring his only other client, Adam Sandler. But next, I went up to Edmonton to do Peter Lougheed's campaign for the premiership of the province of Alberta. He had 9 MLAs in the House, all wearing lime green shirts. And when I left, there were 49 MLAs in lime green shirts, and we'd unseated a 35-year-old government, so I didn't have to wait for the Nielsen ratings to know I'd earned my keep. Then I went back to California to do a show with someone you may have heard of, Bill Cosby. And after that, up to BC for Tom Jones, and then back to California for Good Times. Now, Norman Lear was the champion comedy producer in America. He had 6 primetime shows on the network at one time. And his flagship show was All in the Family. And it had a spin-off called Maud, and Maud had a maid, and the maid was named Florida, and she got her own series, Good Times. And that's the pilot that I did, Good Times. Now with 6 shows, Norman needed so much personnel, but he preferred to shop with the Broadway stage. So the faxes would go to the East Coast on a daily basis. Running low on character actors, need more street types. Running low on writers, need more Jews. When Sandy left International Creative Management, he went with a company called the Brillstein Company. And they were sort of a murderer's row of variety directors. John Moffat, the Emmys, Stan Harris, the Oscars, Marty Pacetta, the American Music Awards. So when all 3 were busy, I worked. So he called me and he said, all right, this is it, kid. You've got the 4-hour ABC Silver Anniversary Celebration for Dick Clark. They wanted John Moffat, but Moffat wouldn't go anywhere near this job. A little humbling, but not bad news, right? Dick Clark was, in fact, the best producer I ever worked with. He knew what was out there and what they wanted, and the show was an incredible success. It was #1 in the country, and I got to work with every Hollywood star. So I'll always be grateful to Dick because he believed in me, he encouraged me, and most important of all, he tripled my asking price. John Hirsch called. He was now head of CBC programming, having had great success at Lincoln Center and Stratford. And he wanted me to come back to Canada to be head of comedy. And I said, I don't want to be head of comedy, but there is a concept that's somewhat interesting to me. And it's in every country. In the Yiddish community, it's the Maven. In Wales, it's Jack the Lad. In the Afro-American community, it's the Kingfish. A sort of guy who can solve everybody's problems but their own. A sort of king of nothing. And thus was born King of Kensington. King of Kensington premiered in September of 1976. It got the worst review in the history of TV, God. Now here's how the season was structured. We would do 13 episodes, and then Frankie Howerd, who was the gifted British comedian, would do 13 episodes. Best show wins and goes to series. We have scripts. It's just a matter of which 5 scripts to choose. We didn't have that week's show written, but I thought if I could push Frankie Howerd into Stanley Cup playoffs where he'd be preempted, he'd be doomed. So I locked my writers into the Park Plaza, and they didn't get out of the room or their pajamas for 5 weeks, and King ran for 5 years. It's a syndrome. My success is directly related to my ability to be frugal with the truth. No question about it. David Steinberg and I grew up a block away from each other, and David left for Yeshiva College to be a rabbi when he was 15. And he ended up a stand-up comedian. Imagine his parents' surprise. I met him backstage. He was doing the Smothers Brothers comedy show. And we reminisced. We hadn't seen each other since we were kids. And he said, just a minute, Perry, I've got to do this. And he went out on stage, and he did Moses and the Burning Bush before a live audience. Yeah. Moses, take off thy shoes from off of thy feet, God said in his redundant way. Moses takes off his shoes, approaches the burning bush, burns himself to a crisp, and God says, ah, third one today. Well, the audience laughed. CBS had a slightly different reaction. They canceled the Smothers Brothers show. Next was the, well, actually, I'll follow up a bit with David because we worked together so often over the years. We did the David Steinberg show for CTV, which saw the first appearances of Marty Short and John Candy, Andrea Martin, Joe Flaherty, Dave Thomas, and Marty still doesn't talk to me because he plays a lounge lizard in the show who's a singer. And our budget was so tight that I could only record a fast track and a slow track. And Marty sang all the songs to these two generic tracks. And he came to me and he said, Perry, can I have a track that's in the middle? I said, Marty, you're getting the top of the show, 195 smackaroos an episode. Granted, it's for a worldwide buyout in perpetuity, but that's a pretty heavy chunk of change. So for the entire season, Marty sang either very fast or very slow. Next came Norm Crosby. Norm was the king of malaprops. I only drink decapitated coffee, and I am definitely a soldier in the war on puberty. Joseph Sigmund was my co-executive producer, and I had a call from Saul Holliff. Saul Holliff was Johnny Cash's manager, and he was very, very good to me when I was doing the Johnny Cash show, and he asked a favor. His nephew had an act. Could I put him on Norm Crosby's Comedy Shop? I said, send a tape. Now, Joe and I had an agreement that if either of us vetoed, the act didn't go on the show. So we were roughly 15 seconds into the screening when Joe said, I veto. I said, I am curious, Joe. Are you vetoing because of the faucet that's attached to his forehead or the surgical glove that's growing out of his head? He said, neither. And here Joe gets very loud. Why is he wearing a diaper? Things weren't looking too good for Howie Mandel. I said, Joe, it's an act of a good friend. We got to put him on the show. I'll pay the $1,000. Everybody got $1,000. Milton Berle, $1,000. Howie Mandel, $1,000. He said, nah, if it's that important, we'll put him on. And he came back from the distributor, and it was K-Tel, and they did our DVDs. And I said, did they have any suggestions? And he said, yes, make sure they include the kid with the diaper. A star was born, albeit in a diaper. Now, Howie and I have worked together a lot during the years. We did the Junos together. We did a gala evening at Expo 86, which featured Prince Charles and Lady Diana in attendance. And the royal rep gave us quite a strict set of rules. We couldn't allude to the prince within 1 minute of any commercial, and we couldn't show him on camera within 1 minute of any commercial. Howie came out after the first commercial and said, I just met the prince backstage. Boom, there goes number one. I just met the prince backstage and I didn't know the protocol. I didn't know whether to bow or to curtsy or to shake his hand, so he bowed. So I shook his head. Please, Mr. Director, don't cut to the prince. Bingo. And the royal rep came from another postal code and said, get that camera off him. But the ship had sailed and the moment was pretty magical. I'll sum up. I hate those planes where they weigh you to get you on the plane. They never feel that safe to me. And my grip on the armrest was only surpassed by the grip on the armrest of my fellow passenger, Billy Crystal. Perry, are you sure this is the only way to get to Cooperstown? We were going to Cooperstown, pardon me, to film a special called A Comedy Salute to Baseball, which was for NBC. And I had, of course, wanted Billy to host because A, he's a huge baseball fan, and B, he's a huge talent. So I phoned the agent said, I'll get back to you, and he did indeed. And he said, Billy will do it as long as he can play catch with Mickey Mantle in Doubleday Field in Cooperstown. As my friend Joel would say, man plans, God laughs, right? But I had a plan. David Israel was my co-executive producer on the show, and he had been Peter Uberoth's chief of staff when Peter did the Olympics in the mid-'80s in Los Angeles. Peter had previously been commissioner of baseball, and he had reinstated Mickey, who had been barred from appearing on behalf of Major League Baseball because of his affiliation with gambling casinos, and he had him reinstated. I said, David, it's time to pick up a marker. David phoned Peter Uberoth. Peter Uberoth phoned Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle showed up at Cooper's telephone, Mr. Rosemond. Hi, Mickey Mantle, he slurred. Uh-oh. Where are you? I told him. I said, but no need to come down. We're wrapping up here, get a fresh start in the morning, and we'll do your bit. 15 minutes later, he showed up. All right, who's the son of a bitch who made me show up for this circus? With all the bravery in the world, I raised my hand and pointed directly at David Israel. Next morning, Mickey showed up. He was letter perfect. He did the bit absolutely to perfection. We put him in a limousine, drove him to the airport. He was back in 15 minutes. He forgot his six-pack. I came back to Canada for good in mid-'80s to put Molson in the sports and entertainment business. And we took over Hockey Night in Canada. CBC, who was broadcasting it, made a request. They wanted Don Cherry on the post-game show because they felt it would help the ratings. He had only done Coach's Corner at that time. I said, well, I'll ask. The next time I saw Don Cherry, I needed him in a good mood, so I avoided my usual lecture. Don, please don't call the Swedish hockey players chicken Swedes. I broached CBC's offer to him. I said, how much do you want me to pay you to stay to the end of the game? And he said, oh, Perry, you pay me plenty. He said, I always have a good time at the game. There's no Don Cherry, no other Don Cherry. And finally, a phone call from Royal Canadian Air Force. Would I direct the pilot? I said, I'm in, as I was for 16 glorious years.
Oh, that was great.
Thanks for listening.
Wow.
Wow.